Introduce our Director of Programs, Ms. Beth Slade. Oh, see the camera angle again. Now we've got someone short, but for all of us, we really need this camera angle coming in from down below. I am Beth Slade. I am also a volunteer here at Meadowbrook, and I'm really excited. One of the faces that you see up on the screen today is our guest speaker. As you can see, we have a couple of options this year of presenters who are coming in virtually. The beauty of this is we can reach out a little bit further than just in our local community, and we're kind of excited about that. So we have 38 people on Zoom right now, and we have about the same in this room, so about half and half. So hopefully this is going to be a really great opportunity. I am very pleased to introduce, I feel like I'm looking at her even though she's not even here. Our guest speaker today is Leigh McGonagle. I'll tell you a little bit about her because obviously she's not here. She is a certified nursery and landscape professional, a CNLP. She's the owner and designer of Poplar Point Studios, coming into us live. They are a premier landscape design and fine gardening company in the Finger Lakes region of New York. She is also a certified Proven Winners landscape professional, and she's going to be sharing her insights today with us on container design, which is pretty exciting because we have some beautiful containers not only here, but I think no matter what your level of gardening is, you at least have a container at home. I have tons of window boxes, so I can't tell you how excited I am about this. Leigh is an experienced designer and business owner. She grew up in Genoa, New York, in the heart of the Finger Lakes. Her professional background includes a degree in landscape architecture from Cornell University. She's passionate about plants and working outside in the dirt. She is a fellow friend of ours. She believes in exceptional quality, strong customer relationships, and continuous learning, which I think we all are as well. Her favorite days are when she can help a customer solve a problem in the garden. Aside from gardening, which I'm sure has very little time left, she enjoys traveling, photography, and making music with friends. So anybody who is online, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please put them in the chat. Leigh will be stopping on occasion and we'll go through those. Anybody who has a question in here, hold your questions until we get to that break, and we will take questions live and on the chat. With that, Leigh, you want to, I'll hand the microphone over to you. Let's see that we don't hang up on you meanwhile. Nikki, you want to turn it up over there? Give us just a second here, everybody.
Okay.
All right.
I won't be able to hear Beth now. So somebody tell me, somebody in the audience, give me a thumbs up when she's good for me to go. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Leigh McGonagle. Thank you very much, Beth, for inviting me. Funny enough, Beth and I have been talking to each other, just missing each other like phone tag for about a year. So I've been so excited to talk to you guys for so long, all this buildup, and now I actually get to see you. I am actually sitting in Atlanta today. I'm on a 3-week road trip around the country on the East Coast. I'm taking sort of the off season to visit friends and family and catch up since sort of pre-COVIDness. So I'm so happy to meet you guys because now you are, I'm hoping today, going to be new gardening friends of mine. So thank you for letting me join you. As Beth said, I am a landscape designer in upstate New York. Our company is going to turn 6 in February. We're primarily focused on high-end residential fine gardening. We provide garden maintenance. We do containers and seasonal decor. And then we also do enhancement work, sort of renovating existing gardens. So it sounds like fairly parallel to what you guys get to participate in at Meadowbrook, which is awesome. I also am part of the Proven Winner Certified Landscape Professional Program. So you'll see me sort of plug some Proven Winner plants today. And again, happy to take any questions. This is pretty informal. I tend to get very excited and move around. So I wish I could be there in person because I'd be calling on people, moving around a lot. So just as much engagement as we can get. My goal today is to share with you some of my experiences around container gardening. I think becoming sort of new garden friends with garden club members is easier to do when we have more of a casual intent. So my goals are to be totally plant nerdy with you. I am a design nerd, so I'm going to share with you a bunch of sort of design techniques that I use that I sometimes don't get to talk about why I'm using the technique. So you're actually going to make me think a little bit today. I also love going plant shopping. So we're going to do a little virtual plant shopping today. And I don't know about you, but every garden club I've been part of, one of the best things is to drive through neighborhoods and pick on other people's gardens and figure out what's working and what's not. So we're going to use my container gardens as the example and pick apart some of the things that work and don't work, which may help elevate some of the design work that you guys get to do. So I thought that'd be a fun way to set up being new garden friends today. So hopefully that will work out for you guys. I'm going to share my screen. And we'll jump right in. Okay, I think. All right, I'm black on my end. Are you guys seeing actual images? Don't send. Can you guys see anything? Are we nodding in the front row? Okay, thank you. I have no audio cues, so I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so planting containers for exceptional impact, which is the nerdy way of saying we're talking about containers today. Our company really focuses on all the plant stuff. Our mission is to plant joy in the world through gardening, and any way that we get a chance to do that is one of my favorite things to do. We're going to talk about container design basics, designer elements, dissecting designs, and then I'm going to hopefully share some inspiration for you guys as well. Give me a thumbs up if you have heard of thriller, filler, and spiller. Okay, great. That means that we have some common denominator language, but one of the things that I get to do when I'm doing this talk in person, or we're doing this at a garden center, is I make them do like a Michael Jackson move so we don't forget this, which is hands in the air. We're going to do the thriller, the filler, and the spiller. Examples of these from proven winners is in the upper left corner is Verbena Meteor Shower. That's going to be a thriller. It's more upright. It's going to take sort of that visual impact plant. Then fillers are going to be medium-sized things that either add to but don't really detract from that impact plant. So that's going to be the Sun Patience or the Superbena. And then our spiller plant is going to be this Dichondra Silver Fall. So what would look like a fairly simple palette is checking off the thriller, filler, and spiller criteria, which if we put them together in a pot is going to look like this. Not super complicated, but it has a lot of layers to it from the design perspective. Like that collection of plants looks good beyond just the thriller, filler, and spiller, which if that's all you use to shop, that's a good place to start. No shame in that game. One of the things that I like to point out when you're going plant shopping is to use the plant tags. My background I have worked in 5 or 6 different garden centers, nurseries, places where I learned plants by watering and touching and picking up the plants and looking at them and seeing how they looked at different times of the season. The plant tags were how I learned plants. So most of the proven winner tags are probably some of the best tags that I have seen. So if you're going to sort of learn while you're shopping, these tags have the most information. They're going to give you information about sunlight, the plant height, if it's going to have a Latin name, or in this case, the Supertunia Rose Blast Charm, that sort of industry name, so that we don't mix up which Supertunia. And then on the back is information about habit, height, spacing, which plant zones they work in, whether it needs water, fertilizer, special features. These plant tags are some of the most informational that I have seen. Most of the time, if you see, a flat of impatience, they're just going to say impatience, right? And so that's not that helpful if I want to match the color from this to this. So these plant tags I have found to be very helpful in my education and also my shopping experience. If anybody knows going through a garden center, if you look like you know what you're doing, people tend to ask you questions. And this happens to me all the time professionally. If I'm shopping for customers at another garden center, I will always get asked. And if it's not a plant that I know, I just do one of these side, pick the plant up and I start talking about it, reading the plant tag to the person I'm talking to. So you get to sound super smart just by looking at the plant tags. The reason that I say this is it's really helpful to know how to combine the right plants for the right place, knowing the information about the plant itself. So looking at, do all of the plants in that collection play with the same light conditions? Easy enough to say, like, okay, these all have a sun, these will all do well in the sun. Awesome. Then I'm looking at the height. Are these going to be in similar, is any one of these going to overtake the others? So if my meteor shower is supposed to be my thriller, and that's going to be 20 to 30 inches, that sun patient that's projected to get 24 to 36 inches might overtake it. So I might have to be aware that if I want to keep it shorter, I may have to pinch it, or that may need to be the thriller at a different time in the season. So just awareness of, do these things play well together? On the back, again, I was checking to see if the bloom time works out, because sometimes I want something to bloom earlier rather than later, checking to make sure that the bloom time works with what my intent was. This as the outcome, saying, great, these check the conditions, they're going to have similar bloom times, the heights work out. This probably would be earlier in the season because the sun patient isn't overtaking the verbena, but using that plant tag information to make sure that the plants play well together is one of the greatest foundations that you can have for having a successful container design. If you can do thriller, filler, spiller, and read plant tags to make sure that those functions work together, you've done 80% of what you need to do good container design. What I'm going to talk about the rest of today is really about that last 20% that's going to help elevate what you already may be doing. I'm going to give you a little shopping moment. We're going to go shopping for a client together. So I have archetypes of clients, and this one is called Residential Rachel. And she gave me, this is actually based on one of my real clients. Her name isn't really Rachel, but she gave me a design brief that said, this is what I would like our containers to look like this year. She loves purple. She wants something fun. Oh, I can't see myself at the same time. There we go. She wants something fun. She has a black thumb. She has 4 very large pots. The budget needs to stretch, which is not abnormal for when a customer is asking us about doing containers. Then I'm going to ask about site conditions. This is east facing, so I'm going to get a lot of sun. There's morning to midday sun. It's on the lake, which means it's going to be windy, and it has to be seen from a distance. So it has to be big visual impact, which may mean that I have to have much bigger, bolder colors and fewer colors rather than having a bunch of little pieces that you couldn't see as far away. It's their vacation home. So my immediate work concern is somebody going to be watering it? They do have irrigation at this house, and they wanted it to be low maintenance. So all of these things are in my head when I'm going shopping. So if we go shopping together, this is the moment that we all are pretty used to. We go to a nursery, we're looking at all these beautiful plants, and what's the first thing that we all tend to do? We go to the things that make us happy. We go to the things that ooh and ah and get us excited. And then you fill your cart with all the things that you ooh and ah about, and then you go to the checkout, and then it's just a pile that you just love, but may or may not go together. So this is how we're going to help ourselves with a little trick for when we go shopping. Let's start with the thriller plant, because if we start with the feature plant first and then build around it, just like you would a interior design, just like you would if you are picking your outfit, if you're not a gardener, I guess. But let's go for the thriller plant first. So let's go through the garden center and pick something that's going to give us the most impact, that and a big bold color. All right, that's nice. I picked a pink thing, but she really likes purple. So let's make sure that we include some purple. So I'm going to pick this Angelonia, which has a little bit of purple and a little bit of white, which is also going to be a filler plant in this arrangement. Now, Angelonia gets quite tall. This variety does. I think it's like 20 to 30 inches. So in a smaller pot, this could be a thriller plant. Work with, this is going to be a medium-sized plant for me. So I'm going to use it as a filler. I might want another filler, but I think I really want this beautiful royal velvet petunia, which is one of the highest seller petunias that Proven Winner has in their line. This is a really deep, beautiful purple, and it's a nice spiller. So now we've got a thriller with the mandevilla, a filler with the angelonia, and a spiller. That's a lot of purple. I may want to break that up a little bit. How about we throw some of this Bordeaux super petunia in? Now I'm going to pick up some of the pinks in the mandevilla. I have to have an apomia because I like having a foliage that spills over. This is, I don't remember which variety this is, but it's a lime sweet potato vine. So now I've got some great spillers that work well together. And I sometimes like to throw a white in just to sort of neutralize all that color that's going on. So this collection, I would check the plant tags, make sure that everything works for sun. They're going to be able to work well together. They have similar watering conditions. The colors check the boxes for Rachel. They can all handle some of that windy conditions. Let's see what they look like when we actually get them planted. Isn't that super cool? So these are Corten steel boxes. I think they are 24 inches. They're 24-inch squares. They and then they rust within a season. But I barely can touch the top of the mandevilla trellis there. They look awesome. The customer was super happy. And we used all the things, and she has this feeling of it feels purple without being purple, 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 purple on top of each other. I know that sounded the most ridiculous thing I'm going to say today. But that's sort of how we build collections. That's how we go plant shopping. Everybody, does that make sense? Thumbs up. Questions on that? Okay. Now I'm going to bring us up a layer. Because I'm a landscape architect, I'm going to use some designer words, which is really just language and having a way that we can speak about things that make sense.
Leigh, hold on
Yep.
just a second. We had one
Yes.
question back.
Go for it.
We had a question in the back.
How many of each of the plants in the 24-inch square pot?
How many of each of the plants in the 24-inch square pot?
Ooh, great question. I tend to pack them in. So I have very, very little space in when I finish because a lot of our clients are expecting that sort of wow moment. That picture is probably the day that I installed it. Mostly because I can see that the potato vine isn't draping super long and the Bordeaux is looking a little scraggly. So I might not have, that might be fairly soon after planting. So I pack them in. I don't have a recipe for the counts because sometimes, you know, that mandevilla might be in a 1 gallon pot. The angelonia might be in a quart pot. The rest of them are usually in 4.5 inch or 4.5 inch grandes. So I don't necessarily know the math on it in my head, but I leave almost zero empty space, mostly because I also know that the plants are going to grow and change and choke each other out. So I need it to look good day one because of the expectations that my clients have. If I was recommending this to myself, who cannot necessarily afford the work that I do, I would maybe pull back on the plants because in summer you've got a much longer growing season. Things have a chance to fill in. So I pack them in for impact day one with my clients. I might pull back on the quantities. So like this one, I probably have 4 sweet potato vine. If it was me, I might just do 2 because they will spread and they'll go everywhere. So I don't know if that precisely answers your question, but hopefully aligns with the intent of the question.
We have one more.
Okay.
I have 2 questions. One, so then you must go back to maintain these, to nip them if this client didn't want to do anything. Like you go back to maintain it, number 1. And number 2, how did you take into consideration wind here if it was on a lake with the mandevilla vine?
Yep. So we do offer maintenance services because we already are on the property to maintain the gardens. So anytime we've got a fine gardening crew there, usually weekly or bi-weekly, we will take a look at the containers every time we visit. Last year, she did the gardening herself, and our
I mainly
crew,
hearing or so.
Hmm?
Well, look at our pictures. Sorry about that. I had someone who wasn't muted.
Okay, so yes, we're usually there once a week or every other week, and keep an eye on those, the big aggressive trailing guys. And it feels bad in August to do a big haircut, but that's fine. That's what they need. So yes, we're maintaining it. Yes, we're keeping an eye on the irrigation, and the house is set back enough from the lake that the mandevilla wasn't as much of an issue. Plus we had it on a trellis, so it wasn't going to be leaning too far. We had it pretty secured. That good?
One more question?
Yep.
Doesn't it get just overgrown in the pot with so many big in them?
Did you hear that, Lee?
Does the pot get overgrown with so much in it? Is that the question? Yes, it can, but we also, when we're doing maintenance, say that Angelonia starts to get too bushy, we'll take the outside pieces of it off so that it stays more upright and doesn't overcompete with too much around it. So we do very judicious pruning when we have that much material in it. I also sort of like that cottagey, let things flow in and out of each other look. So sometimes like I will want the petunias to mix up the blooms, and I will want the Angelonia to be mixed in with the sweet potato vine. I will sometimes train it. So if I don't like the direction that the apomia is going, I'll just clip it off and make sure that it's, leaning over the pot the way that I want, or spilling over the pot. So it does require some maintenance to have it that full. But if we underplant it, our clients don't feel like we've given them the same value. So we always sort of have a fine line about what's the right level of too much. But really it's preference, it's aesthetic preference and budget.
How about the roots? Doesn't that get-
Was it a follow-up question?
How about the roots?
Oh, the roots, don't worry about them. They're annuals. They're fine. They're okay. These pots are also deep enough. I think if you use smaller pots, I would be worried about it, but I tend to go with bigger is better. And my instinct is I would rather have one big pot than 5 or 6 small pots. We're going to have a lot more soil volume. We're going to have room for the roots. We're going to have room for nutrients. We're going to also have a lot less watering. The bigger the pot, the less frequent you have to do the watering. So even if I had to hand water these pots, I still would be able to go 3 or 4 days because they're so massive versus, a smaller terracotta that's going to weep the water out and it's going to have to be replenished more than once a day, possibly. So I tend to go with bigger impact, fewer pots than smaller. And I also tend to go with materials that don't seep, that don't weep the water out. So picking the right pot for the spot is also like a whole shopping experience. Okay, there's 9 comments in the chat. Beth, is there anything there I need to answer?
Nope, no, not so far.
Excellent. Okay, we will keep moving. All right, so design elements that I use sort of beyond that thriller, filler, spiller thing. This is an example of a landscape architecture. This was a very high-end residential design done by a company outside of Boston called Marzilli. And the design elements that make this something that you say wow about are the same design elements that you'd say wow about a container design. So things like balance, structure, rhythm. There's an axis that this main walkway is on. You have balance left to right. You have things like structure and then white space between them. There is continuity of materials. There is a palette, mostly greens here. Even that hydrangea is tinging towards green. Having the same architectural lines. So the building has very vertical elements, and the little light posts next to the chaise lounges are very vertical. So all of these like bougie architectural words that sometimes we use when I want to sound smart in front of clients, but really it's just how do I use words and language to describe what makes this such an elevated look. So some of those words for us, for what we're going to be doing with container elements, is around color theory, shape, texture, scale, variety, unity, form, symmetry, emphasis, movement, depth, perspective. These are all the bougie words. And once in a while, I will say, okay, of all the design language and all of the tools, I basically think of all these as tools that I could use, tools or techniques. How do I pull out in this design? You know, I'm going to use 3 or 4 of those techniques and elevate this look from the original palette to sort of something a little bit more. Now, you can make a hot mess of trying to use too many of these tools all at once. So sometimes I will pick 2 or 3 and say that's good enough. But it really is part of the language for how we're going to elevate a look from just this collection of plants in a pot to, wow, that's pretty incredible. So that's what we're going to go into right now. So quick color theory, if you haven't played with this much, this is probably one of the things that all of us connect with the most. It's why certain plants look better together. They're going to be words like primary, secondary, tertiary colors, monochromatic, analogous, complementary. This is what a color wheel looks like, and it's got some beautiful plant material dropped into there. Chartreuse is one of my all-time favorite things. This is what we would look at if we were in a true art theory class. Primary colors being red, blue, and yellow. Secondary are the colors between them, and tertiary are the ones in between those. So primary colors are not as frequently seen in the gardening world because those are very bold. We tend to see the tertiary colors because that's what's available in the market. Tints is when you take the tertiary colors and add white. Tones is when you use the same tertiary colors and add gray. Shades is those same tertiary colors and you add black. So you might have heard tints or shades. Shades of a color is when they're getting deeper and a darker look. So a lot of times like that, that Royal Velvet Super Tunya is a shade of a violet because it's a much deeper, darker look. And again, that's something that we don't usually talk about, like plant shopping, but it's part of color theory that's happening whether we use the language or not. So I just wanted you guys to know that these are out there. I use this a lot when I'm using, if I'm using color theory to help design, I'm using more of these words. So complementary being opposite on the color wheel, analogous, colors that are sitting next to each other, split complementary when I have basically one opposite 2 colors, double complementary, which I've never used. I think we do it, but we don't necessarily think about it. Triadic is 3 that are basically if you drew a triangle across each other on the color wheel. And monochromatic is if I picked one color and leaned into it hard. So examples of what that would look like. On the left, we're probably in the either monochromatic or analogous where the 3 colors are sitting right next to each other. So that yellow, chartreuse, green world sitting next to each other. The middle is a collection of proven winter plants where they are opposite. So that's going to be complementary. So that deep purple and that yellow. Again, part of the reason that that sparks some energy for you is that they're opposite on the color wheel. And then the
Oops, what just happened there?
oh gosh, let's see. That's going to be the pinks and the orange and the yellow. They're sitting next to each other. Also probably analogous, but that color is much more vibrant. So these are hot colors that make a different reaction from you. This picture is, again, I'm speaking to hot colors, is that red, yellow, orange, fuchsia. This is going to evoke a much more sort of energetic response because hot colors tend to make you react in a sort of outward fashion. Cooler colors are going to be in that soft pinks, blues, lavenders, whites, and that's going to be more of a calming feeling. So if I would like to set a mood with plants and I want it to be calming, I tend to do softer colors or whites. If I want something to be exciting, this is going to be a patio with fun outdoor living experiences and that's going to evoke a different feeling. So that's using color theory to help set the mood for the space. So now we're going to go into foliage. This is another tool that I can use. I love a good foliage. I love a container that doesn't have any color blooms. So this is one of the collections up in Loudon, New Hampshire. Proven Winners has a display garden. And I went up a couple years ago and this pot I just wanted to take home with me. The Dichondra Silver Falls is a super soft texture that you just sort of want to rub your fingers over. The heuchera, that coral bell, the elephant ear, and the sweet potato vine, those are just foliages together. There's no blooms, and they work so well together because we've got that dark purple, that sort of monochromatic look. We've got the silver of the silver falls picking up sort of the silver tinge in the heuchera. There is actually a little white euphorbia over to the side, so we're picking up some of that silvery texture. But all of this is textures and foliages, no blooms. So sometimes I would challenge you to go shopping and see if you can put together an arrangement of plants with no flowers. And it's a very good exercise because then what you're paying attention to is the texture and the foliages and how they work well together. This is another one. I don't remember what the fuzzy leaf thing is. I'm in vacation brain, but it's fuzzy like a lamb's ear. And it's so soft. And again, this is inviting you with that polka dot plant and the grass and the apomia. Like this is inviting you to go touch. No blooms, but still very inviting. And it's all got this, we're still in the color world together. They're in the soft colors. We're not, this is calming, but that the texture that your eye can pick up that this is soft is something that would make you want to go look at it closer. And I am totally somebody who in a garden center will go like, I don't want to say this and be bad, but like I will go grope plants and see if they feel good together and then put the like rough textured thing next to the smooth textured things. So this is an example. I'm an asparagus fern. It looks soft, but when you go up and touch that in a nursery, like it's got some prickers on it. But when you stand back, it actually looks like a much softer thing. So this is about how do you use the foliage of a plant texture next to another foliage. Using shapes, right? So this is something that our eye usually doesn't pick up on, but, and again, I learned these words in school. I don't use them. It's a little bit silly, but having, so like that obovate leaf, the upper right-hand corner, that's sort of what you think of when you think of a fiddle leaf fig, where it's going to have a much smoother edge to the plant versus a very pointy end like that lanceolate leaf. These are all words to describe the leaf shape. And what I'm really trying to communicate is that the way that you use this in designs to elevate a look is to have contrasting shapes. So if I've got this big, heart-shaped leaf of like a redbud tree against something that's sort of long and skinny, that texture change, that shape change of the leaf is actually elevating the look. Even if you like took the picture of the plant in black and white, those two things contrasting next to each other, sort of a big shape next to a skinny shape, that our eye picks up on the difference in those two things. So an example of this is we've got on the left side, this really beautiful alocasia. I always mix up alocasia and colocasia, sorry guys, versus the similarly rounded shape of the begonia underneath. These are using two of the same shapes, but different scales, which is actually kind of cool because these are sort of rounded, softer edges versus the picture to the right, which is that beautiful palm and asparagus fern, much more spiky texture for both plants, but one's a small texture and one's a big texture. So again, this is where we're using the leaf shape and the contrast of size to elevate it. Again, I mean, the begonia has a little bit of a bloom, but really this is about the textures of those two plants together, not a big showy, big mandevilla or something like that. Like this is just pretty simple plantings that you could just as easily walk by, but it's a fairly elevated look to design like this. Flower shape's going to do the same thing. This may be more obvious because we look at the blooms naturally more than we would something else, a tulip shape versus a big palm, spiral bloom like a hibiscus or something like that. Having those two things next to each other. I don't remember the names of all of these, but the point is to look at when you're in a garden center and you're pulling plants together, do these things have the same bloom style or bloom face? And if I have too many of the same things that like look like a daisy together, it's not going to be as interesting as if I mixed up a daisy shape with a vase shape. What I mean by that is, say the hibiscus on the left with the zinnias, or in the middle, we've got zinnias with salvia, which is much more of a spiky plant next to something that is more rounded. those two things, even if they were the same color, would still be contrasting. Now we get color theory, plus we have the bloom style shape different. Now we're elevating it an extra level. And that's with 2 plants. Like these don't have to be, 20 different plants in the same pot to get that kind of a elevated look. Same thing with container shape. I'm not saying that there's necessarily a right or wrong way to do any of this, by the way, but you can see how if you think about the shape of the pot matched with the shape of the planting that's about to happen, you can use that architecturally to set the tone too. So like the far left is easier to tell with a rounded boxwood in a square pot. You're going to get the contrast of shapes much more distinctly versus on the right side where you're going to have a much more loose overflowing thing. It doesn't really matter what the pot shape is underneath of it. So then you're saying that's not as critical to the design, having that very structured format in the very far left versus more of a loose design on the right. This is where my like wild brain goes. But here's examples of, yes, there's bloom, but there's also all these other contrasting things. So in the left picture, we've got the canna with big wide leaves and a bloom up top. Then I have big, wide, fat leaves of the apomia draping down. So I've got an upright and a lower thing. I've got a talinum, which is that sort of airy looking texture in the background, little dots along the stem. That's that airy feel against the verbena that's a little heavier on the left-hand side. Now I've got contrasting bloom shape. I've got color theory going on with the chartreuse and the fuchsia and the purple. Those would be, that might be one of those triad combinations. So this look on the left, part of the reason it works is because I'm using multiple layers of those design elements. The middle one could just be a riot of blooms, and that could be a fun thing that you just throw together things, but there really is some design elements to this too. We have that wispy texture of the guara out back, canna making that big broad leaf versus the little leaves of say the begonia, that really fine texture on the left-hand side draping down. We've got the upright stalking sort of bloom of the lobelia next to the open-faced impatient, that fuchsia color on the lower right-hand side. And then we've got the hot color of the lantana sort of connecting in between all of the things. This could be considered just like a mess of things, but there was very much intention with how do we make sure that the color theory, which is, I'm choosing hot tropical colors, works with the contrast between foliage and texture and bloom and things that are draping. Does that make sense that we've got many more layers than just thriller, filler, and spiller going on? Which apparently I've segued into this because this is what I wanted to talk about next. So this is about how do we put those things together? So for example, if I wanted to use color theory, texture, pattern, symmetry, and contrast as some of those design elements, again, I don't want to use too many and go too crazy, but let's pick a few and see what I can do with that. Here is an example of one of the window boxes that we've done in a high-end area of Ithaca, where I was playing with foliage first. I really liked the little button fern on the left near the begonia. I liked the creeping jenny spilling out. I liked the wandering Jew, which I'm sure I have a better name for, but I was looking at foliage and I really loved the purple heuchera. Again, if I took the salmon colored begonia out, this would still be a very interesting window box arrangement just with foliage. I added the salmon in for color, really that color contrast with the salmon being opposite of the purple on the color wheel and the chartreuse and the green sort of neutralizing and tying that in. This was really intended to be a very foliage oriented window box. It also is in a partial sun location, so I knew it could handle a lot more foliage rather than trying to have too many blooms that weren't going to thrive in a partial sun location. So here's an example of some of the design elements that we put together. It was contrasting foliage. We've got color theory going on. We've got a thriller, filler, and spiller. So my spiller is the creeping jenny. My thriller is really those salmon begonia because they are the show. And then filler is all the other little textures in there. I did use, I can't remember the name of the little white guy in there. But I used a white bloom to neutralize some of the other boldness going on. We also had, this window box is about 8 feet wide. So rather than have tons and tons of little things going on, we repeated the same thing along that whole width, which made it feel more cohesive across the whole distance. So repeating plants, variegation, you know, that the heuchera and the wandering Jew both have variegation in their leaf, which when you get up close, you can see. When you stand back, you don't get to experience it. So this lets this be really interesting up close and farther away. And because we use the same plants in another window box nearby, there was harmony created by having the same plant material multiple places. So what normally would look like a fairly simple but beautiful window box, now I have words and language to describe why there's these other things going on that make it more elevated in its design. Here's another example of this. This is a group of 3 pots with foliage, again, being sort of the main thought. The center pot, my thriller plant, I actually picked a, oh goodness, it's a shrub. I want to say elderberry. I don't remember if that's true. It's a proven winter shrub that can handle partial shade. And what I wanted to do was, it has a super lacy texture like a peony and very fringy. And I wanted to contrast that texture with the much broader leaf of the sweet potato vine that's trailing down. I also love me a good grass in a container, and the fringe of the hakone, the Japanese forest grass, was again another like fringy texture. And we've got the coleus in the back with a little fringy edge. So all of this was about foliage. And then we threw in some color because I needed color in there. You know, we've got the yellow, oh goodness, it is not petunia, calibrachoa, the little same, you know, happy faced little guys. The yellow and the purple is a contrast. But again, almost all of this is foliage related. This is the picture, I think, the day we planted it. Again, it looks pretty full. And then later in the summer, this is when we came back, maybe a month or 2 later. This is where everything has filled in. And again, the show is the foliage, really not about necessarily the blooms themselves. And I don't know if you can see it. Yes, the allium is blooming a little bit later in the season. And I think this is another pot that's about 10 feet away. Same palette of plants, again, still focused on foliage. This is when the allium is in bloom. And this is just after bloom, where I left the seed heads up because I liked the texture that it created in contrast to the sweet potato vine that was spilling over. So this is thinking about how are these plants going to look early in the season and also a little bit later in the season as those plants mature and, you know, do their different thing at different bloom times. Okay, I'm going to pause there because I just threw a whole bunch of words at you on design stuff. Does anybody have any questions? Because I'll just keep going.
Anyone? Anyone? Okay, I think we're good. Keep going.
Okay, cool. Just, I always have to pause to breathe.
Thanks, Leigh.
The other thing I love to do when we go plant shopping, I love playing with perennials. Some of you may do this already where you're in a garden center and you say, hey, these things are beautiful. Can I try them in a pot? Usually we think of containers as something we're putting annuals in, things that are going to seasonally swap out. I love using perennials just like that heuchera in the previous picture, because I can use them both in the pots and then take the plants and put them in the ground. So for my clients, it's a little more bang for your buck, where maybe the upfront cost of that fern is more than the annual would be, but now I get to use it in the ground, at which point it makes it worth the investment. So this was a day where I went to a garden center. They had just gotten a truckload of plants. I snuck in maybe within 2 hours of them unloading and said, all of these babies are mine. They're coming home with me. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I love them and I want them. That's never happened to you guys, right? Like that's just a weird thing that I do. I'm pretty sure all of us have done that at some point. We're like, these are coming with me. I don't even know if I have to sneak these into the house, but we're going to do something cool with them. at this point, we're big enough that I don't do all of the container designs anymore. And our container designer saw me come back and she was like, Leigh, we have a process and you order things and you can't just like buy things that we don't have a plan for. I'm like, but I really want them. And we figured out a way to use them. But I loved using perennials because I think it really is something unique. And especially in an area where my competitors are really garden centers who have annuals in their pots, it makes it more unique for us to play with something that they wouldn't necessarily do. So at the end of the season, we did put, or at the end of the season that we had planted these for, I think I used these in spring. So by summer in June, we used them outside, and then this bed now is planted with great perennials year after year. This is one of my all-time favorite plantings and totally going to nerd out about it. But this is where I got to use those perennials in a spring planting, and it looked totally cool. This is what the front view of the window box looks like. So my thriller plant was the lamb's ear. The reason being, it had such an amazing texture that I couldn't not have it be the feature. Then I've got the heuchera on either side. I think Proven Winners has one called Dolce Wildberry. It might be a little darker than this. Then it was, I won't get the name of the silvery dude. And then we used the weeping or draping pansies and violas to sort of come over the edge of the window boxes. The ferns were the background layer, again, giving me some neutral but a cool texture. We did take a minute there and say, hey, do we like this just as it is with just the plants? And we said it wasn't enough because the window was so much taller. A lot of times you have trouble with this with window boxes being super horizontal. And because spring season is so short, I didn't really want to wait until, you know, even the heuchera aren't going to get super tall blooms. So I needed some way to get us the extra height. So we have pussy willow in there. We've got some artichokes on stems, some lotus pods on stems, and a preserved eucalyptus in there. And that bought me the extra 8 to 10 inches of height that I normally would, you know, in a summer season, I could expect that something that was going to bloom in a couple of weeks, I would get the extra height. But in spring, you don't have that, at least not in our area. So we used decor stems that can be reused multiple seasons as a way to get that extra height. And the way that we design it is sort of fanning out from that center plant. So what you'll see is that almost all of those stems fan out behind the lamb's ear. So this is just something that you can do if you haven't done it already. This is one of my favorite things. Usually you'd see stems in a holiday arrangement, but we try to add them to spring and fall. Again, just adding a cool texture that isn't necessarily normal for us to see. This is the same long window box with no stems. And I actually like it because sometimes just the simplicity of this low, short, long color block is fun like that. And it also, I didn't want it to block the window. That's where the kitchen sink is. So we didn't want anything, we didn't want stems coming up halfway like this. Sometimes it's okay. You're hearing the nerdy designer person who overcomplicates everything say it's okay to go simple sometimes. And in the spring and summer or spring and fall seasons, sometimes that's okay just to like back off a little bit. This is the same house, summer arrangements, where we used a similar color palette for all of the window boxes, all of the front pots, so it felt cohesive. Now, I think we had just swapped out from that earlier spring one, so it ended up being the same color palette as spring, totally on accident, with ferns, heuchera, the silver dichondrophals replacing the silver texture of the lamb's ear. But the reason that I wanted to show this to you is the palette is incredibly simple. It's that salmon, chartreuse, purple, silver. We just repeated it a bunch of times, which has a much bigger impact rather than having every single pot be different. This reads reads well from a distance because it's repeated. Also, it makes my heart happy every time we drive up to this house. Something that you may or may not think about, especially because we are all from a much northern climate, using tropicals that we normally would put in as houseplants, using them as the feature plant as part of a summer arrangement and then pulling them in the house for the winter. You may or may not do this, but we've been trying to use more tropicals because again, it's a unique thing that not everybody does. And I think there's a great book. I'll try to get you the link. Marianne Wilburn is from central or northeast and uses tropicals in containers in her garden and just teaches how to use them in a way that extends the season and adds a little bit more interest than what we're used to seeing. Nerdy landscape design brain. I try to use plants in the containers that are nearby in the ground. So on the right-hand side is a picture of Japanese maple and the Japanese forest grasses. I love the Japanese forest grasses, and I added them into this front porch pot so that it would connect the front porch with a bed that's about 15 feet away. So when you stand back and sort of walk to the entry of the house, you get to see this plant repeated. Secondly, it's a perennial, which means that if I needed to fill in a hole in the bed, I could do that later. But I like repeating plants that are in the ground in a pot so that it feels like it's part of the bigger landscape rather than just this one-off piece. Another example of that is this really beautiful climbing rose at a house near us in Lansing. We had picked a color palette based on knowing that this rose was going to bloom soon. So we've got this very pink and white. I'm going to tell you, I hate pink and white, but I loved it because it helped connect the containers with a plant that was already near the front door. So this is the front door. The day that we planted it, we knew that the clematis was going. So we had the purple, we have the pink, knowing that the roses were going to bloom. So the day of, I would tell you, I don't love this. But what it turned out to a couple weeks later, when the roses were in bloom, this palette made way more sense. And I loved it, where I could really see the roses connecting with what was in the pot. So it felt like it was all part of one cohesive look. This was a very intentionally planned idea. I don't know if we've done it since then, but I really liked trying it out. This is the same view a year later when my client did the pots himself instead of me. And I can tell you that every piece of my body twinges because I can't handle that the pansies are warm colors and the roses are a cool color. Like, just makes me absolutely twitch. Now, here's another fun fact. That grass that's in there is usually what we would all call a purple fountain grass, right? Usually I would use that in the summer to get me through to the fall so that I could see the cool texture of the flower bloom. Unfortunately, Proven Winners has a similar purple fountain grass called Vertigo, and it grows 9 feet in a season, or 72 inches, whatever it is. And unfortunately, my client didn't read the plant tag to tell him that this was not the right purple fountain grass. So when I texted him, I said, hey, well-intentioned, you've got to take that out. It can't stay in the pot because it's going to outgrow the whole front door. And then he put it in the beds, and it ended up being a really lovely purple texture in the ground, not in the pot. So good reminder to self, read the plant tags just in case, because when they're little, everything in that 8-inch pot is going to look very similar in texture. So double check the tags. This is what it was supposed to be. This is that same residential Rachel property. I knew she liked purple, but once in a while I get bored of doing the same container arrangement every year. So we try something new. This one we went a little more tropical. So we did more yellows and oranges and pinks and a little bit of purple. It ended up being that I didn't love that, but it was worth trying. I also liked changing the thriller plant from that pink mandevilla to a texture. This is a either a king tut or prince tut, and it got huge. It was beautiful. This is that same pot a little bit later in the season. You can see the lake at a distance. Very, very cool. But I think I might have used the king tut and it was too big. And next time I would use the prince tut. Again, this is like part of doing container design is you get to experiment a little bit. It's not always going to be perfect. This is me telling you as a professional who gets paid to do this. I don't love that, but I love that it was part of the test and the client thought it was cool. It was the texture that they didn't usually get to see. So I think part of this is it's okay to have a little fun trying different things out. I think the other piece that I didn't love was that I used a purple calibrachoa instead of a purple petunia, and it wasn't anywhere near as much impact of purple. So I felt like I hadn't done as good of a job for my customer who loves purple, I really would have liked to see that Cali be much, much bigger and drape over that whole corner of the pot. If you can't tell, this is the part where we pick apart my own stuff, and it's totally okay. If you have opinions about your own work, this is where we get to share and be transparent about that too. This is another example of layering up elements in fall. Our growing season's super short. I hate mums, but we have to use them once in a while. And so what I try to do is make sure that we incorporate other plant materials so that the mums aren't the feature plant, so that we can extend the season. I don't want to have to go maintain them every week to make sure that we take off all the ugly brown. They need a lot more watering. So in this case, we've got a couple of perennials like the sedum, there's a grass, there's a coral bell in the back. We did salvage the summer sweet potato vine and leave it in the pot because it could make it through the first hard frost. And we added a kale or cabbage. Again, because it wasn't quite as much texture as I wanted, we added some extra decor stems just to elevate the look. You could totally have gotten away with not doing those, but it helped, you know, that extra pop of red out in the background. This was the same property using a similar color palette, but a little different set of plants. So this was a different kind of cabbage. It was slightly different materials for the decor stems. It had that big vertigo grass. I actually used it in the background of this because, again, it was a short season. It wasn't going to overtake the rest. And we had a summer, I think we had a house plant actually in there, which is what's draping along the front. And again, trying different things that you wouldn't normally get to use. Like, that's the point, is having a little fun. So we covered all of those crazy design elements, all the different tools, techniques, things that I will use once in a while. Sometimes I'll say them to clients because it sounds bougie, but really it's just me using all those designer tools in my toolbox to help elevate the look from a standard sort of thriller, filler, spiller arrangement, that last 20%, to something really magnificent. So again, we had talked about the thriller, filler, and spiller. There is nothing wrong with this combo, by the way. This combination, if you can get to this when you're going shopping and you check the thriller, filler, spiller, like I told you, that's like 80% of the, that's 80% of the problem. Like, can you just do that part and feel good about it? Also, you have to love it. I have to meet the needs of customers. All you have to do is please yourself. So if you can do thriller, filler, and spiller, rock on, power to you. That's great. The extra layers that we're talking about today is adding things like texture. So like in this arrangement, we've got the Spanish moss. That's a texture that's not even I mean, it is a plant, but it's not one of the things I planted. With tulips, you know, this is where I've got a vase shaped bloom with the osteosperm, which is a very daisy shaped bloom. We've got a color theory thing going on with our chartreuse and purple, which are opposite on the color wheel. We have perennials, using perennials in here. We've got the heuchera, the lime. I think the proven winners one is the limeade. And then there's a euphorbia that has a purple leaf with a chartreuse bloom in the background. We've added the texture of stems. I think there's curly willow and maybe a couple of pussy willow stems in here. Very simple plant palette, but elevated because we've added these other design elements to it. Does that make sense? Some inspiration, some things I just wanted to leave you with is I am part of a group of container designers all over the country. And this is a map, I think last year, this is updated. I think we've got there's a bunch of us. We get together at least once a year in person. This year, I think we're going to be checking out Monrovia's gardens in California. We're going to do regional events. We're all over Instagram and social media. So if you want some inspiration, the website called Digging and Gathering has this Find a Designer feature, which will show you this map with all the little pins on it. And then you can go reverse stock all of the designers. Some of my favorite things to do in the winter is go get all that inspiration for work that I may want to do for my house or for clients. Three of my favorites, Christina Salwitz is out on the West Coast. She is an author, a designer, and has a small container company. Her books are around foliage first, which, you know, I now have an affinity for. The picture on the left, there's no blooms in that. and it's still stunning. And so she uses perennials, she uses shrubs, she uses evergreens, she uses stems. She picks some of the most gorgeous pottery I've ever seen and has them work with the texture. Howard Nemiroff is like the godfather in Chicago of plantings. He is a true artist with plants. His handle is Plant Parenting. He is the sweetest person. And then Enliven Planters is out in Philly, and they have a container gardening subscription service. They do about 7,000 planters 4 times a year all over Philadelphia. And they do very cool, unique plant palettes. Again, with the example you're seeing here, is like that's a lot of foliage and cool textures, stuff that you wouldn't normally get to see, in a garden center. So these are just 3. If you go check out their social media accounts or any of the other women on or business owners on Digging In, that will help inspire you and get through some of the long, cold winter months. So I think I'll leave it back open to questions and see what you guys may have thoughts about, or if I can help out with anything else.
Leigh, I have a question. Can you touch quickly on how you fertilize, or what, or your actual medium that you're planting in, and how you're fertilizing it throughout the year? Or
Yeah. So mostly we do fresh potting mix. It's like a grow mix that we get from a wholesaler. And then we just spin in an Osmocote fertilizer the first time. And then we tested out 2 different spray fertilizers last summer. Because we're a professional landscape company in New York State, we're not allowed to spray pesticides. So we're allowed to use chemicals to help improve plants, but not manage them or make something less than it was. So we were in the middle of trying to figure out whether we could even apply them legally. So we haven't done a lot with fertilizers in a while, just because we didn't want to get yelled at by the DEC. But we tried a couple last year. I don't remember the names of them. I'll have to ask Allison.
Super. Any questions online or anybody in the room? Oh, yep. Stand up and come to the center if you can.
I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And
Perfect.
I'll just see you guys.
Who had a question?
I have a question. I'm using like the self-watering containers.
What's your opinion on using self-watering containers?
Oh, great question. I could pay you for having said that. A few years ago, I was snobby and didn't like anything on the market. They couldn't keep up with anything. They weren't great quality. I really like ceramic pottery, and I couldn't find anything that I liked. In the last 2 years, I'm a complete convert. We use a couple of different lines. One of them is Crescent Garden. They're based in Florida. They have a little bit more modern styles. They're resin, and they have a line that's self-watering and a line that's not. The self-watering line is called True Drop, and they have an indicator on top with 3 little droplets. And as the water level in the reservoir decreases, the indicator on top shows you like when you need to water it. That line we've tested out, and we can go almost 2 weeks without watering. I mean, certainly the variable is like, how big is the pot already? But Crescent Garden True Drop line has been great for us. And that's a resin material. There's another company that's actually about a half an hour from me called Earth Planter. And that is a recycled plastic with another sort of wicking mechanism, just like the True Drop, where there's a reservoir in the bottom and it wicks up. This one wicks up with remnant carpet pieces, actually. And so until the roots get all the way down to the bottom of the pot, it has a way to wick water up. So that one I like because it's recycled and a little more sustainable. They're just getting bigger in the market. So Crescent's sort of been a bigger player. Earth Planter is becoming a little bit bigger player, but I didn't think resin was perfect for all of my clients. And so the next one that we've used is actually the Aquapot line, which you probably have some awareness of because it's connected to the brand Proven Winners. And those I adore. They are spendy, but they are beautiful. So the last few years, Michael Carr as the designer of the pottery with Jack Barnwell, who has the patent on the actual like the disc and the tube to help have the water reservoir have paired up. They have beautiful pottery, really beautiful collections. Again, buy the bigger size if you can swing it. It's still going to give you more water reservoir. Those have also gone in that like 10 days to 14 days. And I would stand by all of those. I think they're starting to do a new line where you can buy just the disc and the tube. So you could retrofit an existing container that you already have to be self-watering, but I don't know if that's really available to market yet. So those are the 3 brands that I highly recommend. Crescent Garden, which you can buy as a consumer online. I can buy them as a wholesaler at a discount, but you can buy direct and have them direct shipped to you. Earth Planter, I don't know if they're available to the public, but you can check out their website. They're in Auburn, New York. And Aquapot, which is a line of planters, I think only available to you guys at retail, at certain retail garden centers. So those would be the 3 that I have tested. We've tried them at the nursery for 2 years, and we have gotten clients completely converted from sort of standard pots. We made the investment, and it does have an upfront investment, but for the labor savings, within a year, we paid ourselves back, not having to go water all the time. And the plants look so much healthier. I am a raving fan about that in the last 2 years, but I would say 6 years ago, I didn't trust anything on the market.
Excellent. We've gotten comments in the chat that people are really enjoying your presentation. Do you have any more suggestions for pots that are on the water that blow over? How to not have them blow over?
So we've had to swap pottery that I thought was beautiful, but because of the windy locations, they just didn't make it. So anything that you can get that's not top heavy is a good place to start. You can always, and I know this is going to sound a little crazy, we have put bricks in the bottom of resin pottery so that the weight is there. Not because of that sort of old wives' tale about having gravel at the bottom of pottery. Don't do it for that purpose, but it was just to hold the weight of the pottery. So if you can afford to do a big, heavy concrete or ceramic pot, do it. But if you have to do, a plastic or resin, just put heavier weights in the bottom and it should be fine.
Excellent. Yes, we have a question on the floor.
Do you believe that using plastic bottles in the bottom of large pots kind of take up some of the space? Oh, yeah.
Could you hear that, Leigh?
Yeah. So do I believe in putting plastic pottery in the bottom of big pots to take up space? Was that the question?
Plastic bottles.
Plastic bottles. Okay. No, don't do that. And again, that's my professional opinion. You can do what you want. What we have found has worked better for us. I don't want to lose the volume for the roots. So I get the wanting to take up volume of space and not have it have as much weight. So what we've substituted to is putting wood chips at the bottom. So it's still an organic material that can hold water and the roots can get down to it if it needs to, and it doesn't have a lot of weight. But when I empty pots from existing clients and they have plastic halfway down, those, especially the summer plantings, the roots just get way too congested and they really need all the space they can get. So I have moved to either mulch or wood chips in the bottom of pottery. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just not going to help the plants. So if you do it, it's fine, but it's not going to help the plants, especially in summer when we have all that growing season. Those roots really need as much space as they can to go. Another tip that you didn't ask that's related to that is how we empty pots at the end of the season.
Mhm.
Is if it's a big pot, we tend to only empty about halfway down, basically where we've seen the summer roots sort of stop. So same sort of, parallel question. And then we only refresh from there up. And that we will do at least once or twice in the next season. And then maybe every other season empty all the way down. Because it doesn't make sense for us if we have 4 seasons of plantings to empty the pottery unless it's a vacation home and someone's not around for 4 or 5 months, or unless it is not a frost resistant ceramic pot or terracotta, something like that, where we have to pull it in, then we'll empty them every season. But we've really switched. I'm a lazy gardener. I don't want to work harder than I have to. So if I can switch clients over to either a resin, a concrete, or something that's not going to break in our upstate New York winters, that also I can keep potting mix in, that's what I tend to do.
That's excellent. Any other questions?
So what does she do with all that dirt?
What do you do with all that dirt?
So the stuff that I'm emptying out.
Yeah,
So if I'm really efficient and I empty a pot and then I refill the bottom of the next pot with the stuff that is, so the same way that I was talking about using wood chips in the bottom, I don't mind using the crappier soil in the bottom of the next pot up to halfway, because it's not really going to be providing any nutrient value. It's just soil capacity. We also happen to have a nursery at our shop. This is like a luxury that you may not have. I don't know if the grounds at Meadowbrook have it, but we use it. We throw extra, plants that we've taken out, all of the compost, if we've got leaf litter from spring or fall cleanups, all of that empty pots, and we recompost it at our facility and then use it in garden beds. So we use it as a compost material, but it's basically run its life course for any nutrient value at all. Like after that first, I think maybe 4 months, any of the nutrients that were in the potting mix are not there anymore. So it's really just filler material if I'm going to reuse it on the same property, or I bring it back to the shop and we compost it.
That's good. Any other questions? Nothing. I don't see any more on the chat.
what about her favorite potting soil?
I haven't tested too many out yet. We buy it in bales, like the 3.9 cubic foot bales. And so I look ridiculous carrying them around, but because that's the efficient way for us to purchase them. I do often use like the yellow Miracle Grow bags. If I'm mixing in the very top layer of a big pot, like I'll use my base, cheaper, inexpensive bale of potting mix for like 80% of it, and then mix in, maybe a higher grade potting mix at the top, or something that has the water capsules that'll hold a little bit more moisture. So I sometimes have played with that, but really what I have found is more critical is having a large size pot with the most soil volume possible, having really healthy plants to begin with, and then just keeping them watered. Those three things I have found to be more valuable than investing in expensive potting mixes. Now, the reverse of that is true when I'm doing in-ground landscape plantings with perennials, shrubs, trees. I invest tons of time and money making sure that the planting bed is prepped, because the soil there makes significantly more difference for a long-term planting. But I haven't necessarily thought it was worth the investment for a seasonal pot in potting mix. Like, I don't spend the extra money on the fancy potting mix because it's only there for 3 months. So if I buy really healthy plants and I have a big pot with lots of soil volume and I'm watering consistently, I haven't had any issues with the potting mix that we use not performing well enough. But that's just one perspective. We do hundreds of pots and that's been fine for us. It may be something that we start to experiment with, just like we did the fertilizer that says, which of these scientific variables is going to get us better, healthier, beautiful looking pots. But we also overplant a little bit. So you wouldn't necessarily notice that the plants aren't performing the same as if you had less plants in the same size pot. Then maybe investing in a bigger, in a nicer quality potting mix would make sense, but we pack them in so well, you wouldn't notice the difference in the growth rates. I think that's where you're going to spend money on soil and have less plants, or you're going to spend more money on plants and have less quality soil. And they basically, in my last 15 years of doing this, have evened out, and I want more plants. So that's where I spend the money. It's not wrong to do what you're saying. It's totally okay to invest in better potting mix and having fewer plants. I just like more plants.
I think this is pretty good segue into our upsell. We want to go back and talk about that, and have kind of the inspiration. Leigh, I don't know if you can hear the gaps and the odds that you were showing some of your pictures up there. I think it's getting everybody to looking at the snow out there, finding getting us a little bit into that season. So I want to say, Leigh McGonagle, everybody here, we want to say thank you so much for working.
Thank you guys for letting me join you. And if I'm ever out your way, I would love to hang out and be plant friends. If you're ever out my way, feel free to reach out. We'll be doing a lot more over the next couple of years. I've been hiding a little bit and not telling people about what we do, but we'll be doing a little bit more and probably doing some more proven winner stuff. So if we can ever be of help, feel free to reach out.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Swing by Meadowbrook Hall whenever you're in the area. We'd like to show you around what we do here as well. We've got a little gift we'll be sending out in the mail to you. When you get home, it'll be waiting for you. All of our Meadowbrook Garden Club members, the recording will be up in a couple of days. If it snows, it might be up sooner than later. It'll be on our Meadowbrook Garden Club YouTube channel. If you're not sure what that link is, read your newsletter. Another plug there. Next month, we are going to have one more virtual presentation. An expert is coming in, Dr. Kevin Forrest from the University of Florida, Natural Resources and Ag Extension. He is an agent there, and he's going to be talking about agriculture myths. So everybody who's online, join us again next time. You can come in person. We'd love to have you here as well for some hospitality and member of gatherings. So please, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Safe travels to you and happy planting. Yeah.